Well, good morning. Well, we'll just jump right into it. We are just going through chapter 11 today, 11 and 12. So we're starting with chapter 11. What if Jesus was serious? Then we will value an ordinary life more than a famous one. So the part of the Sermon on the Mount that we're kind of coming to is actually verse 13, verse 14, 15, and 16. And it's just this is what it is. Oh, I don't have a slide clicker. Is it, you are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it's lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? Will it be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless? You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp, then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. Now, I'm going to really just be honest. When reading this book, it kind of challenged me to look at this, especially these couple verses, just a little bit differently. Because often when I've looked at it, when I've read things, when I've even heard things about these few verses, and understandably, it points to, okay, what is it to be salt of the earth? What is it to, that means that you can lose its saltiness. What it means it becomes worthless. Or if the light of the world, what is that, how am I a light? And all those questions, which are good questions. However, we kind of can miss over, I know I can miss over a really crucial part, and that is the you are. And because those verse 13 and verse 14 starts with a you are. So we need to ask the question then, if Jesus is saying this, who is he addressing? Because sometimes that's just as important as what he's saying, is exactly who is he addressing, who is he talking to in this moment. Now, I want to be honest, when you look at this part in Scripture, quite many translations will put a heading in between verse 12 and verse 13. And though that could be really helpful for memorization or maybe in things like that, that was, when Matthew wrote this, he didn't put a heading right there. He just was continuing what Jesus said. So sometimes just in our minds, we have a separation from the 12 verses we had previously read that moves into this, that all of a sudden sort of just, okay, this is something new subject. Jesus has changed from here. And the truth is that sometimes those are really bad. They're put in really bad places because we just disconnect the two. So if we actually go back to the beginning of chapter 5, we even go back to the end of chapter 4, we find out who he's talking to. He's just talking to a crowd. He's in Galilee. He's not talking at this point to the higher ups of society. He's talking to the ordinary, regular, average, everyday people. Again, if we keep it in context of what we just would have read, if we read those first 12 verses in chapter 5, they might be people in this crowd that would have recognized themselves in his description of those he just called blessed. People who never would have associated themselves even with the word blessed. Definitely society wouldn't have associated themselves with the word blessed. So the crowd is filled of people who are just not obvious, or at least in the cultural idea deemed obvious, because they're not the elites. They're not the highly educated. They're not the super wealthy. They're not the major influencers. These are your laborers, your fishermen, your carpenters, your bakers, your shepherds, your everyday people. These are people that probably no one's telling stories about of their amazing odysseys and exploits and travels. These are people who no one is going to have, they're not going to have books written about them. Netflix isn't looking for their biopic. They're just people. The other thing is that when you read, especially Skye's title of that, like, you want the ordinary life over the famous. And you might say easily, I have no desire to be famous. Well, that's actually not even the most important thing, because it's not about just not being famous. Much like those people who need to hear who's blessed, who might have recognized themselves in the idea of who Jesus was blessing, they may not have had a desire to be famous, but they would have thought in order to do something amazing, I got to leave something, an influential life. You know, I need a particular set of talents and some sort of education or something obviously gifted, significant influence, and needed to somehow be effective for Jesus, or in this case, salt and light. And it's really interesting if we just break that in, and you are the light of the world. Truth is, we can easily start to see how to disqualify ourselves. Not because we just don't say, I don't want to be famous. That's not an issue I'm having. But you might think, but in order to do something, I need some sort of notoriety. And we forget that Jesus is saying, you are. That he's going out of his way to affirm the ordinary, everyday people living ordinary, everyday lives and the blessings that they are that come from God. And those blessings that come from God, or another way to look at it, those validations that come from God of something the world needs to truly be impacted with, that'll actually help experience God and his kingdom. Again, I think it's really easy for us to say, hey, we're not interested in fame. But if we look at the amount of views one gets on YouTube, the likes, maybe retweets, we can say if only we had that, maybe more people would be influenced by me. You know, and it seems like even in this world, I don't know if you've noticed this, I noticed with my kids, like now it's the idea of, you know, what do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be a YouTuber or some sort of influencer. And gone are the days are doctor, fireman, policeman. That's what I remember myself and kids wanting to be they grow up. Now it's YouTuber and influencer. It's something with significance. You know, and when Jesus says that you are the salt and the light, these many people, you're just living this ordinary everyday life with ordinary everyday interactions. And I know, truthfully, that doesn't necessarily sound exciting or sexy. You know, it's not necessarily a marketable thing just to be ordinary. And I'm not saying, you know, you can have a desire to impact the world. You can have that. Some sort of accomplishments, you know, and you know, we are thankful for those who have and will. It just means we should be okay with the ordinary life. That we can actually be impactful without all the fanfare. Because Jesus at this point is being affirming. And I love this quote from Skye. He says, Jesus affirms the world-shaping value of the ordinary people who follows the ways of an extraordinary God. That being salt and light does not require us to be something absolutely amazing or famous or extraordinary. Because the outcome is of our ordinary lives, it should be the outcome of our ordinary lives that's lived out in rich communion with God. And sometimes there's such a disservice when there's that heading in between verse 12 and 13. That we can be living out, we can be validated by God of the blessings that he has, that we can be the light, we can be salt. You know, and I love the idea, I love this. I've been reading what's called an indigenous translation, and I love how the guy who wrote this up did these two verses. He says, as you walk the road with me, you are the salt of the earth. As you walk the road with me, you are the light of the world. Because once again, it's not about necessarily us being significant. It's not about us necessarily doing something amazing, having this huge following that everyone knows your name. Because in order to be salt and light, it's the road we walk with him. Because it's the road we walk in communion with him. There's so much value in the ordinary life. People can experience Jesus in neighborhoods, parks, work, school, committees, social groups, just in the everyday things of life. In fact, I would say this. God's mission is to redeem and restore a broken creation. Through his life, his death, and resurrection. Through the gift of the Spirit, God's people can bring that in order to bring creation into its perfect order with his Spirit. I believe Jesus is saying this is actually best done through the ordinary life. I know this world says, if you listen to this podcast, if you listen to this speaker, if you read this book, and there's some value in that. But there's something so much in the ordinary life, and the people we run into. And if you're wondering, the you are is definitely us. But it doesn't need to be this famous life. And we need to sometimes put that down, because I think sometimes, I know I can. I definitely can. Kind of basically get caught up in, I need this some sort of acknowledgement and influence and all that sort of stuff in order to be truly salt and light in this world. But it's better done in the ordinary life.